Will the A10 Mini get SRT support? This is the question that everybody's been asking since Blackmagic launched SRT support in the Web Presenter and Streaming Bridge 2 weeks ago. The day before IBC, Blackmagic announced a bunch of new products and updates to existing products. One of the things that caught my attention is that they added SRT support to the Web Presenter and the Streaming Bridge. Why is this important? Well, historically, they've only supported RTMP in these products, which really only works well if your internet connection is very fast and very stable. So it's not a great option, for example, for live streaming from an expo hall show floor. SRT, on the other hand, is designed to handle poor network connections much better than RTMP can. It's also an open standard, unlike NDI, so it's super exciting to see Blackmagic embracing it, especially by adding it to existing products. The Web Presenter and the Streaming Bridge now have a free update available that you can download right now to add SRT support to these devices. So you can send an SRT feed from a Web Presenter to a Streaming Bridge remotely, which means it should work a lot better on bad internet connections. So after that announcement, I had two big questions. What about SRT support in the A10 Mini as an encoder, and in the Television Studio HD8 ISO as an 8 SRT decoders? I mean, how cool would that be to stream SRT from any of the A10 Minis, giving much more reliable live streams to YouTube or other destinations? And since the TVS HD8 ISO basically has 8 streaming bridges built in, what if you could receive SRT feeds from 8 separate encoders? My second big question is whether the SRT receiver will be as locked down as RTMP. For some reason, when Blackmagic released the Streaming Bridge, they made it so that it could only receive RTMP feeds from other Blackmagic devices, like the A10 Mini and then later the Web Presenter. Sadly, you couldn't stream to the Streaming Bridge from other encoders like OBS or IolaBox. It was never entirely clear to me how intentional of a decision this was, as in, is this something they decided it should be how it works, or was it more of a shortcut they took when developing the product to be able to ship it faster by only needing to test with their own encoders? Well, since I was at IBC last weekend, it was the perfect chance to talk to Blackmagic directly and get some answers. I found the Blackmagic booth and I found someone to talk to. Now, sadly, I wasn't able to get this conversation on video because Blackmagic is very strict about only allowing their press-trained people to be on camera. Everybody else at the booth is available to have discussions, but they aren't allowed to be on camera. So I did find the product manager of the Streaming Bridge and was able to talk to him, but I couldn't actually film it. I first asked about SRT coming to the A10 Mini and the ATEM HD8. It would be so great if the A10 Mini could send a stream over SRT, and it would be especially cool if the HD8 ISO could decode 8 simultaneous SRT feeds. Now, he wasn't willing to say that it for sure is going to happen because, as you know, Blackmagic likes to keep things quiet until they are actually launched. But I got a very strong hint that it wouldn't be surprising at all if SRT comes to the ATEM lineup as well. Obviously, there was no indication of timing, so it could be next month, or it could be like the stinger button on the Extreme, and we'll still be waiting for it in 3 years. But it makes a lot of sense, and assuming they get good feedback from launching SRT in the Web Presenter and Streaming Bridge, I suspect we will see it in the A10 Minis sooner rather than later. So then I moved on to my more difficult question, which is whether the SRT receiver in the Streaming Bridge is locked down to the encoder in the Web Presenter. And the answer I got was a bit complicated. It sounds like what happened at the beginning of the Streaming Bridge launch is that the priority for them was to get a working solution for receiving the stream from a remote A10 Mini. And if that meant taking some shortcuts to getting that use case working well, then that's what they did. So the focus was on getting it working and shipping, not necessarily doing all the development and testing to make it work with any arbitrary RTMP encoder. So here we are 3 years later, and there isn't necessarily the same time crunch they had at the original launch. But some of the shortcuts they took ended up embedded in that hardware, and they can't necessarily fix it in a firmware update. So since SRT is just a different way of transporting a video stream, it's still the same video stream that ends up getting decoded in the Streaming Bridge. So that means the video stream itself does need to be in the same format that the Streaming Bridge works with. What this means is if an SRT encoder happens to be encoding the H.264 video stream in exactly the same way that the A10 Mini does, it will probably work with the Streaming Bridge decoder. And now that I'm back at the studio, I actually updated my Streaming Bridge to try this out, and I learned a few interesting things. On the new firmware, version 9.2, the Streaming Bridge does actually accept an SRT feed from other encoders, not only the Web Presenter. Now, I can't actually get the right settings on OBS on my M2 Mac to get the picture to actually decode right. It's a big mess, but it is actually trying to decode it. I was then also curious about RTMP. So I set up OBS to stream via RTMP to the Streaming Bridge. And surprisingly, it's also actually trying to decode the stream. Now, just to double check that I wasn't hallucinating, I downgraded the streaming bridge back to 8.6 and I tried it again. With the old firmware, OBS gives you an error message when you try to stream to it. And back on version 9.2, OBS does successfully stream to it and the streaming bridge tries to decode it. Which means it actually looks like Blackmagic removed the check for a Blackmagic encoder entirely, both over SRT as well as RTMP. It turns out what they had done in the old firmware was actually just check that the encoder says that it's a Blackmagic encoder, which actually meant that you could recompile OBS to send that sort of connection header string, and some people did that and got it to work. But now they've just removed that check entirely, so it doesn't even bother trying to verify that it's a Blackmagic encoder. Now, big caveat here, this is not officially supported by Blackmagic, so don't go complaining to them if it doesn't work. But if you can get the right settings on your encoder, you should be able to get the picture to decode in the streaming bridge both over SRT and RTMP. I'll do some more experiments later to figure out the right encoder settings to use with OBS, but I'll save that for a future video. So back on the show floor, I did make sure to tell Blackmagic that a lot of people are interested in using this streaming bridge with other encoders, and that they should seriously consider making it an officially supported feature of the streaming bridge as well as any new products. I know they're kind of tempted to lock you into their ecosystem, but the reality is that people are always going to have a mix of gear, and being able to have a bunch of different SRT streams pushed into the ATEM Television Studio HD8 ISO from not only Blackmagic products would make the ATEM even more useful. So let's give them some concrete ideas for how people would use SRT support in an ATEM encoder or in the HD8 decoders. Comment below with your reasons why Blackmagic should open up support for receiving an SRT stream from any device, not just a web presenter or an ATEM Mini. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.